Good evening, everybody. This is Patrick from the Poison Pen Bookstore, and we're here with another of our virtual events. And this evening, we're very excited to have Fabian NIcieza. Close enough?
En español, muy bien, yes.
Claro. Here at the end of what I'm sure is a very exciting and exhausting publication date to launch his brand new book, Suburban Dicks. And Fabian was nice enough to sign a whole batch of copies. I really love your stylized signature. That's very cool.
Thank you. It's been my comic book autograph for 30 plus years, and I've tried to keep consistent with it.
That's awesome. But for those of you watching, I'm going to be monitoring the Facebook comments. So if you have questions for Fabian, go ahead and put them in, and I will reemerge towards the end of the program to ask some of those questions. And Barbara is sitting there from her home office, and she'll be doing the interview tonight. So I'll go into the darkness.
I love it. Mr. Shakespearean, off he goes. Like, well, we had a conversation whether he was more like Caliban than Ariel, but it's a kind of Shakespearean typist thing. It's really wonderful that we have autographed copies of this. Now, I have to say that of all the Poison Pen staff, I am probably the least qualified to be talking to Fabian, not Fabian. I want to call him Fabian because it's the Spanish thing, but Fabian, he says, is what he's used to, having left Argentina at the age of 4 and gone through the American school system. In any case, I am not wise in the way of comic books, even though, let me tell you, that as a child in Winnetka, Illinois, when I got my allowance, I would get on my bike and I would pedal up to the 5 and dime. I mean, we're talking the 1940s here. And I would spend my allowance every week on comic books. I absolutely loved them, whether it was Superman or Batman or Wonder Woman or, various other characters. And do you remember, or did you ever run across, Fabian, something called the Little Big Books?
Oh yeah, sure.
Well, my uncle, bless him, when he went off to war, World War II, had left behind a huge box of Little Big Books that were the delight of his childhood. So I read my way through Flash Gordon and the Evil Emperor Ming and all of that. Those little books had fabulous illustrations. They were a book comic, right?
Yep. Yep.
Oh.
And that I discovered them after I discovered comic books here. When we came here in 1966, my brother, my older brother, and I recognized Batman and Superman, simple as that, on the racks. We recognized the comic books from the TV shows we'd been watching in Argentina. And it was actually the 50s Superman show and the 1940s Batman serials that were running on television in Argentina. And my brother recognized them immediately, so he asked my parents if we can get the comics. And I was only 4.5, going on 5, and so whatever he wanted to do is what we ended up doing. And my parents said, okay, fine, because they weren't that expensive, and we certainly didn't have a lot of money when we came here. And we just started to learn how to read and write by reading comic books. And my brother and I both drew, so we really easily and naturally kind of gravitated towards them. And I read them. I kept reading them my whole life. It was never an obsessive kind of a collection thing. I just enjoyed them, and they were just good for the imagination, is what it amounted to. And it made me realize, probably by the time I was around 10, 11 years old, that I'd love the opportunity to become a writer one day, because I loved the idea of creating stories.
Well, graphic novels are kind of a thing at the moment, although comic books are going. But I forgot to drink a toast to you on your publication.
Thank you very much.
My apologies.
I appreciate it.
Right. Our events are usually BYOB, but Fabian at the end of a tiring day is just drinking water, but not my problem. I'm drinking
it's 9:15 my time. No, my wife and my daughter threw me a surprise sort of like appetizer thing, and there was champagne and there was bourbon, and they duded up the porch, the screened-in porch we have, with congratulations and things, and I didn't even know they were doing it because I was upstairs doing an interview at the time. So we had a little bit of champagne and bourbon earlier, so I decided 9:15 my time. I'm gonna stick with water for now.
I love that. My husband, who I'm happy to tell you is my resident chef, is out in the kitchen putting together a bourbon maple pecan chicken dish. And
that sounds fantastic.
Well, it'll either be really good or be really wretched. I don't have any idea, but he loves to create things. So I was also going to tell you, talking about childhood memories, that my grandparents lived across the street from the guy who, and I'm trying to remember whether I used to remember this better. He either drew Dick Tracy or he wrote Dick Tracy. Milton Gould, I think, wasn't he the creator of Dick Tracy? Do I have that right?
Chester Gould.
Chester Gould.
Chester Gould, yes.
And I can't
right?
remember, I really can't remember which one it was, whether it was Chester or the guy. But anyway, you know, they had all that cool technology and so forth that I can remember when I was like, you know, in elementary school, that I would think about two-way wristwatches, you know, because we could go over there would be the panels drawing and there would be all this cool tech stuff. And who knew that in point of fact, all of it was going to come true. And I've always found that so interesting, that the things that people put in comic books and in science fiction, to a great degree, have really happened.
Yes.
You know, it's almost, you know, tapping into the future. Now, I looked up your biography in Wikipedia so I could introduce you, and I was exhausted after I read about 14 paragraphs there. But what I did learn from this, aside from the fact that you came from Argentina at the age of 4 and lived in New Jersey, went to school in New Jersey, which might be the reason that Suburban Dicks is a book that I describe as like Harlan Coben on steroids, because, oh, it is suburban New Jersey. Anyway, if anybody would regard the politics and the shifts in publishing with a calm eye, it would be you, because your career has been marked by perfectly astonishing shifts, you know, in and out of corporate stuff. And you've gone freelance. I lost count of how many times, you know, you rose to some prominence in something or other, mostly to do with, well, actually you worked for your current publisher, Putnam Berkeley, back, what was it, in the 80s or something?
1983 to 1985, I worked at Berkeley Publishing.
And a lot of new authors, because amazingly, despite all of the work that you have done, this is your first novel as compared to comic book or screenplay or whatever else you've been writing. A lot of new authors are completely thrown by publishing politics, but if anybody was well positioned to just dance across that tightrope, it's certainly going to be you, looking at your career. So you must have had a really good time, you know, and a lot of confidence in yourself, because, you know, to leave an actual salary job and go freelance as often as you have, what does that say about you? Does it say
sometimes it wasn't by choice?
That's what it says.
I loved working at Berkeley Putnam. It was a really good company and a really good group of people there. I was there for 2 years, and if it hadn't been for the fact that an opportunity presented itself to get a job at Marvel Comics, I probably would have stayed at Putnam Berkeley longer. But because Marvel Comics, there was a job opening that I could apply for, and it's a company I'd wanted to work for since I was 10 years old. I went and got the job at Marvel and moved up within the ranks at Marvel. I started selling my writing as an employee of Marvel. You did your comic book writing freelance, not in the office. The office was for your office job, and my office job was advertising manager, which is what I went to college for, public relations and advertising. So I did all of Marvel's advertising for them in their comic books, the retail stores, direct market shops, and I did promo posters and house ads and co-op ads and all of that stuff. So I was really kind of, my DNA was less as a writer and more as an administrative staff guy. And I loved it. I loved the job. I was in my 20s going into my early 30s, and I loved working on staff. And I switched from advertising manager to editorial only because I needed a change. I'd done one for 5 years, and I ended up being an editor for about 4 years. And I asked to be an editor of anything but the kind of comics I was writing. So I was writing superhero stuff, and I ended up editing Barbie comics, William Shatner's Tech World, Ren and Stimpy based on a Nickelodeon cartoon, Alf. I did some movie adaptations from Marvel, like the Hook movie adaptation that Spielberg had directed. So I did that on purpose because I wanted a diversity of experience, and it was great. It was not easy because licensed books are real tough to do. But it was a great experience because I learned a lot. I met a lot of people outside of the comic book box, you know? So I always liked it. I always liked bouncing back and forth. But not now. I guess I think now those days are kind of over. But even as recently as a few years ago, I'd be going into New York. I always call it the city. Sorry, into Manhattan a couple days a week to work with a company in Manhattan called Starlight Runner Entertainment, and we did story world development for Hollywood studios and toy companies and video game companies. I've been doing that as a freelancer with them for almost 20 years. And it was a way to get me out of the house and get me into the city, which I always like to do. So I lost the aspirations to be a publisher and editor-in-chief, all of that. I lost that a long time ago as I got older, but I still like the idea of an office environment and that kind of interaction and teamwork and socialization.
Well, I brought it up because the Suburban Dicks is not your ordinary debut novel. It has a lot of features that I think must arise from your past experience. I'm always interested. I mean, we love debut writers. We live to host events for debut authors because, I mean, and I can certainly attest to it that if we get you at the outset, we get you, you know, we get to keep you. So nurturing a career and, you know, promoting new voices is a very big thing with us. Although we are also faithful forever to, you know, to authors that we have long-standing relationships with, but you always have to start somewhere. So, you know, it's exciting to be able to do this with you. And your book has an interesting quality to it in that it's set in suburban New Jersey, and your heroine, your protagonist, shall we say, comes on the stage and you think, what's with this woman? She's phenomenally pregnant. It must be, she has 4 other kids. So, you know, she's like a baby machine. And she stops in this, in the crime scene, as it all turns out, because one of the kids really has to pee. Now, that's not your conventional opening. So why is it that you were so, why did you decide to start the book that way? I mean, I think it's fascinating. I've had the opening of the book in my mind for so long. I've tried to put it on paper a few times and wasn't happy with it. So the original genesis of it was simply a way for me to introduce in a kind of a unique way, in a visually different way, for me to introduce the protagonist of the book in all of the reality of her, especially both sides of her. The side that she has to live with every single day, the minivan with 4 kids and a 5th on the way, the extra seatbelt strap that now needs an extra seatbelt strap so she can get it around her stomach, combined with the opportunity for her in a split second to realize that the minute she walks away from the van and steps into a crime scene, she's actually in her element. And no offense to moms, none of us would be here without them. But for her true self is in solving crimes, and she has not been her true self for the last 10 years of her life, and she's only 33. So it was an opportunity, I thought, right off the bat, to introduce the reality of the character and the dream of the character at the same time. And then it was a matter of finding the language to make it work. Well, sure, but the key word in that whole discussion right there was visual, and that's what I was going back to, was to say that because you have come, you know, from, you know, Deadpool, X-Men, the comic book world, and so forth. As a writer, you're going to be more visual in the way that you want to present the story. So I'm not surprised that you didn't create an arresting scene in order, as you say, to show us the 2 sides of this woman. Now, when she steps into a crime scene, she is not totally without experience, right?
No, she was a criminal justice major in college. She had cracked and helped solve a major serial killer case when she was in college. She'd actually ended up working with the FBI in New York City while she was a student at Columbia. We only kind of hint a little bit about some of that backstory. She'd also solved a crime while she was in high school, which was a high school girl from a nearby town in South Brunswick who'd been missing for 20-something years, and Andrea found her remains, and then ended up finding out who the killer was. And she did that when she was in high school, but it was a much smaller local story that didn't get the attention that the serial killer in Manhattan that she helped capture. That got her a tremendous amount of attention at that time. But when she was ready to graduate college and she was planning to go to Quantico, she ended up getting pregnant and decided that she was going to keep the child. And the man who impregnated her boyfriend Jeff, proposed to her, so they ended up getting married, and that just took her in a different direction than the one that she was planning to go.
So having gotten pregnant by accident, by unintentionally pregnant, let's put it that way, and marrying the father, why does she compound that by having all these other children? Because really with one child, she could have continued on, in the direction that she was going with her career. But once she was continually pregnant, and now with 5, that would be difficult. So if this is a kind of moment where she has an opportunity to conceivably reboot part of her life and bring them together, why did you decide to give her all these children? Did you just want her to have like a long layoff?
Well, hopefully the contract I signed with Tottenham was a 2-book contract, Barbara. So you'll get a lot of those in season book 3. The truth of the matter is that she allowed her life choices to take herself out of the equation. She allowed the fact that she had one and then was pregnant with a second and then had a second and we became pregnant with a third. She kept asking her husband to get a vasectomy and he just refused to do it. It speaks to some inherent issues that she has. I had no real interest in writing superhero. I've written enough of those. I wanted to write people that had flaws and people that had internal conflicts and had made mistakes. I just found it more interesting. At the time that Andrea was conceived, she was kind of an amalgam of several friends in my life. And it was a time in our lives when we were all getting married, getting our first houses, or townhouses, we're starting to have our first kids and our second kids. All of that happens to so many of us between roughly 29 and 34, and that's kind of the age she is, because that's roughly about the age I was when I originally came up with the entire concept. And several of my friends were struggling with the decision as to whether to go back to work or be a stay-at-home mom, the decision to whether to have a second kid or third kid, that how to overcome a miscarriage. All of those things were happening to me and my wife, my friend group.
Excuse me.
Bless you. And all of that ended up informing her. And what happened is that because it took me so long to find confidence, frankly, to write the book and to be satisfied with my own prose writing, I outgrew the character by 20 years, So I can look back on her now, having had 20 years of experience, positive, negative, things I'm really happy about and things that are recriminations, and infuse her current status quo at age 33 with a foresight that I didn't have back then, because now I know where her life is going to go. Now I know the choices she's going to make. And I know how she got herself into that place and how she's going to kind of get herself out of that place. I kind of have that all in my mind for how I want to continue to evolve the character. But all that being said, that she's well aware of the mistakes that she's made, although she would never call any of her children mistakes. You know what I mean? That it's that eternal conflict we have, you know, especially women who are incredibly educated, incredibly capable, and either have to or willingly leave their career. And then having listened to all my friends and talked to them about how they feel about that 20 years later, how they feel having left the job they had or having left the career they had. And some of those regrets and recriminations within the context of the fact that you have your kids and you love your kids and you raise your kids, you know, not easy.
I wasn't being judgmental at all. I was just curious.
Not at all.
In that, you know, it's a different ballgame, as I say, if you're a person with one child, which a single adult can manage. But once you go to two children, it's almost impossible for one adult to wrangle two kids. And when you take it up to 4 or 5, then it becomes a necessary team effort. So,
Yes.
you know, you have to have a husband who's on board or the whole thing falls apart, or you have to have, you know, other resident relatives or neighbors who are suffering from grandparent withdrawal or whatever. And if you're going to have a person investigating a crime, this comes up a lot. And it came up in the 90s a lot in the women's sleuth movement about whether any of these women, because that was the whole private eye movement, you know, that was propelled by Marcia Muller and Sarah Peresky and Sue Grafton and all. If you had children, how much danger might you incur to them? But the larger question is, if you were constantly running into danger, who would pick up the pieces if something happened to you and take care of your children? So it becomes a risk aversion problem. And I was interested that, you know, that you've given her all these kids, because if she's thrusting herself into danger, which in fact she does, in Suburban Dicks, then that's a really tough question to answer. You know, who will take care of my kids if something happens to me when they are so young and, you know, and so many. And it's true of men too. I mean, it's the same problem for dads, you know, if they have a number of kids, you know, how, you know, are they going to be firefighters? Are they going to be cops?
Yep.
Are they going to be,
Cops, yeah.
you know, going to be spies? You know, what is it they're going to do? But men seem to, you know, it's more normal, societally normal anyway, for men to be running risks, even if they have families, than it is for women to be running risks. So we're in an era where the most common word applied to women at the moment is agency. This is another of those buzzwords that really annoys me. But basically, it's saying, you know, empowering women to not only make their own choices, but to accomplish things without male support, so to speak. So, you know, what you're saying is that she was all set to go in one direction, then she got pregnant, then she went another direction, maybe went farther in it than she might have. And now all of a sudden you have given her, by the simple act of her driving her van into a place and opening the door so her kid can leap out and pee, you've plunged her into a crime scene. And here she is. She's going to get to make some choices that up until that moment really haven't occurred to her.
Yeah, and once she starts the process, I tried very hard to make her stubborn about needing to see the process through. She's quite confident that she can handle threats and she can handle potential danger, mostly because she doesn't pursue through the course of the book, for the most part, that she's in any real threat or in any real danger. I made a rule for myself when I started the book, which was myself for my comic book roots, and a little thing I wrote down, and it was no tights, no flights, no fights. I wanted to take the tropes that I existed under as a superhero comic book writer off the table, and allow the characters to move through a story where the potential for danger was there, but I wasn't going to have, Andrea drawing a gun and getting in a firefight while she's 8 months pregnant. And I wasn't going to have Kenny all of a sudden miraculously know how to fight. So I meant to keep it that way because I wanted I wanted the conflict to come as much from internal sources and their interactions with each other and with the world they live in, rather than from external sources being the antagonists who have the gun or the antagonists who are going to physically threaten them. And I have no clue whatsoever if that was a risk or not. I have no idea whether it was the right choice or not. I wanted to write a different kind of story for me, and it's so far it's resonated with the people who've read it because the closest thing we come to a car chase is a 72-year-old guy trying to catch up to Kenny while he escapes in his Prius. And we don't even know if the gun was loaded because the 72-year-old guy doesn't know if there was any bullets left in the gun, So I kind of did that on purpose because I wanted it to have a little bit more of a soft landing when it came to the physicality and the threat of violence.
Oh, I think suburbia, if you read guys like Linwood Barclay, or I've already mentioned Harlan, Joe Lansdale wrote a really interesting essay. Patrick's going to be talking to him tomorrow night. And his new book is a standalone set in a small town in Texas. And, he said, small towns are what he loves, the secrets, the dynamics, how much do your neighbors know about you? How successful are you in maintaining any kind of privacy? What happens when everybody knows your whole history and you can't escape from it and all. And so he likes that canvas. So many crime novels are set in, urban centers. I mean, there are reams of them set in New York and Los Angeles and Boston and, cities. And a small town is a very different dynamic. Even Agatha Christie really liked villages more than she liked London, to set her crime novels. So here you are in this suburban New Jersey. You're near, obviously, major urban center, like across the river, but you're in New Jersey. And why wouldn't there be all kinds of things that, hidden secrets, maybe, people behaving badly. And I like the way that you worked your way through that in the book. Obviously, we can't talk about it, which is really too bad because it's
we can't give away.
I know.
I'm still trying to figure out how to talk about it without giving away too much.
Well, it's really tough when you're doing an event at the outset and you don't want to ruin it for the reader. How much do you tell them and how much do you conceal? But this is her life. She's not going to follow whatever's happening at the crime scene over to Brooklyn. I mean, she's got 4 kids. She's got a band. She's going to stay in her New Jersey. What is it called? West something here.
West Windsor, New Jersey.
West Windsor. Okay. So, her life is in West Windsor. She can't easily get out of West Windsor. So whatever's going to happen in the book is going to take place in West Windsor. But just because it's a suburb doesn't mean that it's not a microcosm of, a much bigger area.
And the town itself, the general area, it's actually West Windsor, Plainsboro, which are kind of sister towns, and I've lived in both over the course of the last 30 years. And they've given up their secrets a couple times. Like, we had a murder in Plainsboro just a year ago, which was a bit of a stalking situation. It was a work-related stalking situation. We had a missing girl who was, unfortunately, the poor girl was, I think she was around high school age, and she was missing for a decade, 2 decades, and they found her remains literally like underneath an old mattress in the woods, but not deep woods. The woods really close to like main roads and everything. And those things have happened in the area, but for the most part, other than robberies, which are relatively common, it's a relatively safe area to live in. We're in the shadow of Princeton, and Princeton University. We're nestled between like New Brunswick, New Jersey, and Trenton, New Jersey, which are urban areas. But New Brunswick has Rutgers University, which is where I went, and it's where one of my characters, Kenny, went to school. And we commute into New York. Most of the people who live in the area who work in the city just take the train and commute into the city by the thousands on a daily basis. So we're exposed to things, but they're not so commonplace. And one of my concerns, actually, even starting the book as the idea of a series, and I got several ideas that I'd love to turn into books, but I also don't want it to become Angela Lansbury and Murder, She Wrote, where 180 people have been killed in Cabot Cove or whatever her town was. You have to be careful as to not overplay that reality. So I've taken that into account in my mind about how not to cheat theater by making it a little unbelievable. So if we get a series out of this, future books will take place in some neighboring towns as well. The second book has quite a bit of activity in Manhattan, in New York, because the victim worked there. So that's kind of Kenny's side of the story, having to deal with Manhattan, and Andrea's side of the story is having to deal with the events here in the Westminster area. So I'm trying to take that into account, and still have it fall under the category of Suburban Dicks.
Got it. Well, I mean, the anonymity that comes with city life means that keeping secrets are often not nearly as important as in a small town where there's actually more pressure, I think, on people to keep secrets, where families' reputations matter. People are not moving around as much as in cities. But you're listening to that reminded me, one of my favorite authors, David Rosenfeld, who really is a funny writer. His most interesting concept was that he had a guy who works in Manhattan commuted to New Jersey. And so the crime took place in New Jersey, even though you thought when you started it was going to be in New York. I love the fact that he reversed, the normal dynamic. But, there are two things that we should really talk about. We've been sort of heavy here, but the point, this is a really funny novel. I mean, everybody who reads it, everybody talks about it, really, really likes the humor, which, arises out of the situations. But at the same time, you really do skewer prejudices. You have some amazing things fall out of people's mouths. And so in a way, it reads, you're stripping off mass by putting some really horrendous, I'm trying to think what I want to say. You have people saying things that in the light of our particular woke culture at the moment are really pretty shocking, but they're just commonplace to the people who are saying them. And it reminds me of my parents and my grandparents, because if I listen to how they refer to people today, if I hear it in my head, it's kind of horrifying, but that was just common parlance, like reading Chandler. I mean, you could read a Bowdlerized Chandler, but if you go back and read, those early noir writers in the 1920s and all, the way they refer to people and all would be just totally unacceptable today.
Well, yes, and it's something that you have to be very conscious of. And my approach in my writing for my entire career since I started, I've always manifested in the work a variety of characters that create what we today call diversity. We didn't call it diversity in 1892. I don't think the word existed in 1992. You couldn't find it in the dictionary, and I always did, because I grew up a little bit in New York City. I grew up in a lower middle class areas of New Jersey. I'm an immigrant to this country, so I've always kind of skirted on the edge of being the other, but never really quite being the other. And it made me conscious of it without often being overtly affected by it. And I live in a town right now, and I have lived in this area since 1988, and that was 30% Asian, the community in the area, and it's now about 60 to 70% Asian. And I have been a part of watching that happen, and I know it bothers some people. It didn't bother me because after it literally went after me. And I drove a minivan as a soccer coach that had 7 kids in it, and the 7 kids were all from different cultural backgrounds, you know, and that was kind of West Windsor, Queensboro, and the kids grew up without it being a real issue for them. It's the parents that have them. And quite frankly, we had kind of a rollover, a turnover of a lot of the original owners of the houses that came up in the farmlands were all Caucasian. And when it came time to sell, the buyers were all Asian. And they were Indian, or they were Chinese or Korean or Pakistani, and that was who was buying a lot of the larger houses here. And it did definitely create a cultural turnover. So the Caucasians are in the minority. And I hear it, I listen to it, it's all sporadic conversations, but there's a bit in the book that came from real life, which is the soccer parents that the men clustered together regardless of their culture, but the women were separated on the sideline watching the soccer game by culture. And I know this because myself and my Asian American coach were on the other side of the field as coaches, and we looked across the line of parents, and we actually looked at each other and went, "That's interesting." You know, no judgment, no anything. Just that's interesting, and I just absorbed all of that. I absorbed listening to the kids chattering in the car, talking about stuff going on at school, and teachers they liked or didn't like, and teachers who were prejudiced, teachers who were prejudiced against certain kinds of kids, and they would talk about it. So it's such a commonplace sort of a frustration, but not in not in a hurt way. It was more of a, do you believe that guy is such a dope, you know? And again, I just absorbed all of this stuff. So yes, it took me 25 years to write the book, but I'm in hindsight, I'm super glad it did, because I think that gave me a tremendous amount of kind of subconscious information to draw from. And I try to put that in the book, and I try to give it some honesty, but I always try to couch it in humor, because you can sell a lot more with humor. You know, it's the catching flies with honey rather than vinegar. So if you have cynical, sarcastic, fun humor, and you're an equal opportunity offender to everyone, you know, then you can say more and in quotation marks get away with more. And that's hopefully when someone draws something out of it that is a bit of a truth for them, or a bit of an honest understanding that they may have been thinking the wrong way, or they may have said something the wrong way, or someone else may have said something to them, and they reflect on it now and realize it. So if I can sneak all that stuff in there, it's almost organic to just processing the characters interacting.
Well, I think organic is a key word. Patrick, come and join us, because actually you're better qualified to lead this discussion than I am.
Hi, Patrick.
You're probably salivating over there in the dark going, wait.
Welcome back, Patrick.
Not at all. No, I've been enjoying the conversation.
No,
Patrick, when you're not on screen, do the lights just go out where you are? Are you in complete utter darkness?
No, not quite.
Okay, because I was worried. I didn't.
He's actually working on other stuff. But Patrick's a very talented editor, and he's a real student of noir fiction and noir humor and so forth. And I don't call this noir, but nonetheless, what do you think, Patrick? Introducing humor into crime fiction is a real talent, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it. You know, when it's done well, it's great. You know, and I like the idea of the Black humor. You know, a very dark kind of humor. but yeah, it's so, humor is so subjective too. What might be funny to one person isn't funny to the other person. So, can you talk a little bit? I was going to ask you too. I also was reading about your bio, and it sounded to me like you really worked your way up in the comic business from the very bottom. Can you talk about how you kind of got started at Marvel and other places?
Yeah, I got it. Thank you for the question. I've always felt that I didn't work hard enough at Marvel to get where I got. I always felt I kind of cheated the system, as it were. I got a job at Marvel Comics in the Marvel Books department as an assistant in manufacturing department. Marvel Books was at that time was not hardcover books. You were trade paperbacks you sell in the bookstore now that compile multiple issues of a comic book into one.
Right.
Marvel Books back then in 1985 was nothing really more than a licensing agreement with Fisher Price, and we were doing activity books, and sticker books, and coloring books. But I never wanted to be in manufacturing when I took the job to get my foot in the door at Marvel.
Yeah.
And I betrayed the woman who hired me because 4 months after I started, an opportunity presented itself in the promotions department. And I applied for that and I got that job. I took a pay cut too to take that job. And when you're entry level publishing, we all know that if you take a pay cut, that means you're going from less than nothing to less than nothing. And I took the job because I wanted to work in the promotion and publicity department in Marvel, because that's what I went to school for, and that's what I thought that I could help and excel at doing. And at the same time as the guy who was hiring me to be his assistant had some big here above him to be a vice president in charge of a newly formed publicity and promotion department. And he took a year to figure out what the department was going to be, and then he named me advertising manager by December of 1987, and he just did my job. And it was through that job that I got to know the editors who do the buying of who hire the writers, the pencilers, the inkers, the letterers, the colors. And I started to sell what's called inventory stories, and those are self-contained, completed issues that sit in a drawer, in a file drawer, waiting for the schedule to break down, because it's mostly publishing. The schedule always breaks down, because human beings having to draw 22 pages a month, it's physically really challenging to do it month after month. So that inventory store would always be ready to pull out of the drawer the second you needed it, and you can plug it into the schedule, into the production schedule.
Wow.
And gain yourself 30 days by doing that, and that's kind of how I made my bones. I sold a few inventory stories, but the reason I say that I don't it's too easy is because after 3 inventory stories that I did, the editor-in-chief at that time named me the monthly writer of a book. And I got a monthly comic book within 6 months of having sold my first story. And that, I'm not going to sit here and pat myself on the back and say it's because I was so tremendously talented. It was just a combination of a lot of things going on at that time that got me that monthly book. And I wrote it for 16 issues until it got canceled. So in essence, my training ground was in monthly publishing work as a writer. That's what I started to really figure out what I did. And then from there, a couple of years later, I started to write more successful superhero stuff. And then quickly from there, I was offered the X-Men assignments, which were the top selling books that the company had at that time. But again, into that was multiple events overlapping each other that got me a lot.
I have a feeling you're being humble here. Obviously, you had
no, I don't think I am, because
you're a natural.
No, I've said it before, and I'm more than happy to say it in as important a venue as Poison Pen. I have always considered myself to be excellent in my mediocrity. I have always felt that I have been right there in the middle, shading up, and it's through hard work and through persistent excellence in that mediocrity that I've been able to maintain a 35-year career. I've never once been nominated for any kind of comic book industry award, And we're certainly at the point now where I would really question the values of any organization that would choose to nominate me. I've always just been a hard worker, and I've always produced material that met enough of the standards by which the audience and the editors were shooting for, that they kept getting more work. And that's, when you get to be my age and you've been doing this as long as I have, and you have ups and downs and successes and failures, you have to kind of take it all with a bit of a grain of salt. Understand that the roller coaster has to have some slow rises in order to give you the exciting, drops. So it's got to be a bit of everything.
It's fascinating because it seems like I've always been really interested in the classic pulp era, the pulp magazines of the, 20s, 30s, 40s, before television came. And, they had all this just wildly inventive, and a good writer would follow the market and would write in the horror pulps, the Western pulps, the adventure pulps. And it seems like comics retain some of that spirit, which is really interesting, that side of the marketplace. Would you agree, or is that?
Yeah, no, I mean, the comics derive from the pulps. I mean, the Batman, Superman, all of that derived from Doc Savage and Shadow and the planetary stories and strange stories and all of that. I think that what's happened though is that comics are too long defined solely as a medium for the superhero genre, and that's because of the success Marvel Comics had in the 1960s, reinventing its characters, and Stan Lee and Jack Kirby and Steve Ditko and all of them. And as a result, the only comics that were selling successful for decades were superhero comics. We're at a point now which I find very fascinating, and that there's probably never been a greater amount of diversity of content in comics from a genre standpoint than there is today. There was comic content and material for just about everyone and anyone, but the superhero comics aren't selling as well as they were 20 or 30 years ago. Therefore, the perception of the comics are in trouble or failing. The truth of the matter is that the content is just selling in different formats to different audiences than it used to.
Right, absolutely.
That's really interesting. Yeah, the evolution of it. Right.
Yeah. And I read somewhere in your bio that when you were a very small kid, you really learned to read and write with comics. Is that right? And so it's just such a part of your DNA now, right?
Yeah, my brother and I learned how to read and write English. Neither one of us were left back a grade. I started in first grade here in New York, and he started in fourth grade. We weren't left back. I honestly don't even remember much of my first grade in Queens, New York. My memories don't really kick in until we moved to New Jersey in '68 when I was entering second grade. And I think that's simply because I was learning a language. We came here with no English background at all. My parents barely spoke any English when we came here. So I think in that 1 year, I learned English. I learned how to read, write, and speak English, but my brain doesn't remember it. And literally, I just don't remember it. And I know that reading comics and the language of comics that was expanding at that time, the language of Stan Lee and other writers were purposefully putting into their books, because they also knew their audience was aging up a bit too, and all of a sudden they had college students starting to read their books in the late '60s. That it expanded the vocabulary enough. And in many ways, always spun me off into other things. Like Conan comic made me realize that Robert E. Howard had written Conan as a pulp, series back in the '30s, Conan books.
Right.
And that gravitated me to Doc Savage, so I started reading Doc Savage. And then 6th and 8th grade for me, middle school years, was this pathetic assault on Doc Savage and Conan. And look, as a kid, little by little, you start to look for slightly more mature things, but I also evolved in my comics reading that way, because as I got older, into my college years, I wanted to keep reading comics, but I started to gravitate towards other things like Howard Chaykin's American Flag, which was published my first comics, which is a really kind of smart sci-fi book. I love The Rockets by the Hernandez brothers, which to this day is just a phenomenal comic. Two different storylines by each brother, and not a superhero really to be found in it. And all of that kind of stuff always appealed to me. Even though I made my bones and I made my living in superhero comics, I was always interested in other kinds of genres. And as a reader, I would gravitate from Stephen King to James Ellroy, and I never had a genre. I would just read things that interested me by writers that interested me.
Right. And you said, you mentioned your brother, is it Mariano?
Yes, Mariano's my brother. He's
He
like
works
25,
in the
30
same-
years older than me.
So you're like Lee
I
and
have to
Todd
say
Goldberg.
that, Patrick. I have to say that because he still has all his hair and he's 3 years older than me. So I always gotta give him a dig no matter what.
But he works in the same field, right? In comics?
Yes, he currently works for Dynamite Publishing, and he worked at Marvel for a little while. But for years out of college, he worked at Ziff Davis Publishing.
Have you collaborated?
We not as writers. I've written things for him in an editorial capacity. He just asked me to write a project that he had been trying to develop for quite a while, which was Stan Lee's God Woke. It was a self-contained hardcover book that was an adaptation of a poem that Stan Lee wrote in the early 70s. So my brother asked me if I could adapt it for him, and I got to talk and work with Stan Lee in the latter years of his life when we were adapting that.
That's cool.
And it's an interesting poem because it stands perception of what God would think about mankind if God came back. And it was Stan Stan being serious Stan, and it was actually very smoothly written. It was fun to try to adapt.
Wow, it's interesting that your previous life has dominated this whole conversation because it's been so fast.
Yes.
Let me just say, well,
we can't give away anything in the book.
Oh, well, I did let you down in one respect. This book is called Suburban Dicks. Notice, Dicks plural. So we've mentioned Andrea Stern, the very pregnant mother of 4, former FBI profiler who stumbles upon a crime scene and realizes that there is something wrong at the crime scene and that the cops are not really giving it their all. But we didn't talk about Kenny Lee because to have a plural, we have to have 2 suburban.
Yeah, that 2 suburban.
And
Dicks.
Kenny, like Andrea, had a great thing going and then got derailed by bad reporting. I mean, he made stuff up or whatever.
Bad choices.
Yes.
A little bit of a mirror, a little mirror to
another
Andrea
bad.
too.
So he's gotten busted back to, to working in suburban New Jersey as a journalist. And so the 2 of them come together and, they balance each other out, but they form this investigative team, try to figure out. And that's how the investigation proceeds, because there really is a crime, more than one, and an investigation in the book. And, all of the humor and all the rest of it arises from all of that. So I felt like we needed to mention Kenny because it takes 2 of them in order.
And Andrea's kind of an overwhelming presence, and I knew that, and I knew that all along, and I get that, but I think that Kenny's there and necessary.
He is necessary.
Her out,
absolutely.
but because he also has access to avenues that she doesn't have.
That's right. They are better together. They are stronger together. But also, you've created 2 people whose life choices, have put them in a place where they're going to realize from this case that their life choices were, that they could change them, perhaps, that they'd made some choices that were not that great, and maybe they now have an opportunity to do something. So in its own weird way, it's kind of a coming of age novel, except
it is. And
coming of middle age novel is closer to the whole deal.
Kenny has a lot of doubts and insecurities and stuff that I had stuff at that time. But I basically had to push his success 10 years earlier, right? So when I was turning 30 and 31, I was writing X-Men. I was writing 3 of Marvel's top 10 selling books, and along with 3 other titles and a full-time job. So I was writing 6 to 7 monthly books for Marvel with a full-time job. Those comics were selling about 1.6, 1.7 million copies a month, every month. And that's as much success as anyone could have expected they could achieve in the comic book world, right? Both financially and in terms of output, not in terms of quality, trust me, but in terms of output. So at that age, I was asking myself, this is fantastic, this is phenomenal. What the hell do I do next? It's never gonna last forever. It's a short-term wave. I knew that. The big wave was happening at that time in terms of sales and attention and stuff. So what am I gonna do next? And I needed. Kenny came up from that insecurity. One day, if you won a Pulitzer Prize in journalism when you're in college, for a job well done, quite frankly, working for a college newspaper and then having mainstream newspapers want you to work with them to continue breaking the story. He earned that Pulitzer Prize. What do you do after that if you're a journalist? If you're a journalist and you won a Pulitzer at 22, what do? So I tried to just play that out with him. But the initial germ of him was, what do I do next? Because that was what I was asking myself at that age, at that time. And I played Kenny out in very different ways than I played my own life out, thankfully. But I needed him to start from a place of failure after having tasted success, because that's kind of the other side of the same coin as Andrew.
It is the other side, exactly. That's why they make such a good pair. You need the balance in it, but you also need their different skill sets. So it all works out. Patrick, are there any questions from the audience that you wanted to bring up?
They are notably silent. Although Mary says, she says, I'm really identifying with this character. And, what you just described from both of them, I think a lot of people can relate to that, the very human attributes and that a wide audience will relate to. Let's see, what else? Pat was asking about, I think you may have covered this, but she says, is this going to be a 2-book series? And I think you've established it's going to be more than that, right?
Well, we gotta see. There's the realities of business involved. When we decided to go with Putnam, it was a 2-book offer, and I've the second manuscript's in the pipeline. It's being line edited now. I would like to do more. I would like to do spin-offs as well, because there's other things I'd like to do with some of the characters. But that is always going to depend on how the books sell. And I also understand that series sometimes don't explode right off the bat. You have a top 10 bestseller or whatever with your first book. Sometimes it takes readers a few books to get into a series. So I'm hoping that we get that opportunity to build that story world a little bit. And there's also the possibility that there will be television for the franchise. And if that happens, if it's still an if, but if it happens, that always helps, maintain that series backlist selling in a good way. And Putnam knows that. So hopefully, I got my fingers crossed. I'm at a point right now where I'd love to start book 3, but there's no contract to start book 3. So I'll wait until we see where we go.
What about a comic adaptation?
Thank you for asking that, Patrick. That's a very interesting question. I have 2 graphic novels that I've already outlined and broken down, and that are the prequels that I would like to tell, and I'd like to do that in graphic novel format if I can. Andrea's story of the Marana serial killer in Manhattan when she was in college and she first met Ramon, I have broken down as a graphic novel, and Kenny taking down the governor of New Jersey while he was in his senior year in college. I have that broken down, outlined as a graphic novel also. If the opportunity presents itself to work with a publisher to do that, I'd be interested in pursuing it. But the honest truth is that producing a large body of work in comic book format costs a lot of money. Art and editorial costs a lot of money. So it's got a publisher has to be interested in working on that. So it's in my back pocket. I'm turning 60 years old this year, Patrick. It took me 25 years to write this book. I figure I got another 30, 40 years to go. I'm still good.
Here's a weird question for you. When you were turning, as we've established that the comic graphic novel form is such a part of your DNA, when you turn to prose, do you think in terms of individual, obviously it's very visual.
Yeah, no, not in terms of panels. What I definitely realized as I was working on Suburban Dicks, but much more so with the second book, is the second book was an easier process for me because I just understood the format better. I overwrote quite a lot in the first book. We had to cut a lot of crap out of the manuscript from the version you're holding in your hand right now, because I overwrote because I lacked the experience to understand where it needed to be tight. But what the comics have really done is help me, I think, with my pacing. The dialogue is absolutely a help because you have to carry so much information and characterization out of dialogue in a comic book, but you have the visuals to help you with that. But I've always been pretty comfortable and facile with dialogue. But as far as the comic book plotting is concerned, translating that into prose benefited me to have the experience of having been a comic book writer, because it really made me understand kind of just the cadence and the pace you needed to keep the story going, to not extend chapters longer than they needed to be, to end chapters on hopefully the kind of a note that you want the reader to go, okay, I'll just read one more chapter before they turn the lights out at the end of the day. I think that the cliffhanger ending aspect of comics in monthly sequential publishing, where you're not literally doing a cliffhanger, not every month, but you always need to end your issue with the idea that you want to give your reader a reason to buy the next issue. I actually applied that to my chapters, or tried to apply that. And sometimes I realize it doesn't always click just right, where the chapter ends just the way you want it to. But I think it did often enough that it gives the book a feeling of momentum and a briskness of pace, I hope, that comes out of my experience as a comic book.
Very cool.
Well, I would agree with that. I'm such a speed reader. I read the whole book in one sitting, but
oh, that's cool. Thank you.
I was propelled from one thing to the sheer improbability of the entire setup, kept me going. I kept thinking, where is he going with this? And I thought where you went was, I'm so sorry we can't talk about it, was really nifty. I really did like
Barbara. I hope you have me back on for book 2, and then I could talk a little bit more about.
We can. I know. Patrick and I, if we had more time, we would love to do some follow-up book club discussions, because we've done a couple, and it really is nice to be able to give readers, a couple months to read the book or something, and they come back. I know the problem is that there's so many other books and authors. It's really hard to try to fit them in, but it would be really rewarding if we could do it more often, I think.
It would be my pleasure to come back anytime in any capacity, even if you have reader questions afterwards. I'd be happy to answer them.
What we could do is get together a small group of authors, where we weren't just focused on one. We could be a little more efficient and have several authors come together and make it sort of a free-for-all. So we can look into that for sure. Was there anything else, Pete?
Nope, nothing from the audience. It's interesting though, it might be fun to have somebody else who also works in both fields, like Brad Meltzer or Greg Rucka or some of the other authors that work in both. Dwayne Swarzinski, who's a good friend of mine who does both.
Neil Gaiman, he's got a couple of graphic novels and so.
Joe Lansdale, he does everything.
Yeah, Gary there's Phillips. A lot. There's a lot of guys. Alex Seguro is a friend of mine who's written a lot of noir, and been the head of Archie Comics for years until he just left Ferroni.
Maybe
There are a
we'll
lot
put
of us.
together, that's the great thing about Zoom is that you can actually, I mean, there are many things that are really handy about Zoom. So one is you can actually put together a group like that without worrying about travel logistics and so forth.
It
So
is interesting how separate the two parts of the marketplace are. It really is. Don't you think, Barbara and Fabian?
Which
Barbara, by all
which
means.
two marketplaces do you mean, hon?
The comic book world and the
Oh,
print book world.
Yeah.
They're very different.
they really are. We have never had much success selling graphic novels, and we don't even attempt to stock comic books at the store. But there are other stores.
I think a lot of it is also the genre considerations, like Neil Gaiman has had tremendous crossover from his original Sandman comic books that he
Right.
wrote in the 90s to his novel work. That the Sandman audience and the Sandman genre propelled him into his book writing, and obviously he's grown that audience since then. But a lot of the like Dwayne will write a mystery novel or a hard-boiled novel, but that's not necessarily the kind of comics he's writing. So even with me, no one who has known my work for 35 years is going to think that I was going to write a book about a 33-year-old pregnant woman with 4 kids solving a crime. I don't know for sure yet how that my comic book audience throughout my career would translate to my book audience. What I want to explore is how will my potential book audience translate to telling comic format storytelling, graphic novels in the book story world. If I get 3-4 books and Andy's super popular, can I sell a graphic novel of Andy's prequel story to the Poison Pen audience that's buying the book? That to me is where you start having opportunities to sell comic book format material in hardcovers and trade paperbacks, because it's a genre affiliation as much as it is a creator affiliation.
I wonder if a younger audience is more likely to embrace that too, because there's a lot of fluidity, I think, in entertainment choices among the young. And they're so used to being on their phones and playing games and doing things. I think that the barriers are far less in transitioning from one thing to another. So we'll see. I mean, that's one thing we do talk and worry about, is how to get a younger audience, because we have a more mature customer base, and how do we bring in more young people? So try to figure out. It's been interesting since the store opened again back in whenever it was. When did we open again, Patrick? Fully in March, I think it was, or
It was before that.
whenever. Well, we were open, but not as open. I mean, we had a limited opening. Now anyway. The children's section has just been turning over at an amazing rate, and particularly on the weekends. And up until COVID, if we sold like 5 children's books a month, it was going to be amazing. And now they're just going shh. So clearly there's a new reader group, whether it's families, maybe there are more people living downtown. I don't know what it is.
I wonder, that's actually curious. It makes me wonder if the year shut in, as it were, led to the exploration of other entertainment opportunities.
Well, I think so. It may have been that it's made kids go, to books to a great degree, and with movie theaters shut, and the kinds of things that kids would have gone to. And certainly in adult fiction, people have been reading classics. I mean, our classics section's really been turning over, and they've been reading like War and Peace, or things that you wouldn't have tackled in a busier world. So
They've been buying War and Peace. We don't know if they've been.
Well, that's true, Patrick. Good point. They've been buying
and Proust and all that kind of stuff.
But it'll be. I don't know if it's really just like pandemic specific, in that people were shut in, and whether they will shut all that when they can get back out again. It's too soon to tell.
Yeah, it is, and I certainly hope it's not.
The effect of this is,
I have a good friend he's an engineer at Fender Musical Instruments. They have a corporate office here in Scottsdale, and they've had one of their biggest years ever. because I think that's it. People are, buying instruments and hanging out indoors and taking up new hobbies.
I'm finally gonna learn how to play guitar.
Right, exactly.
It's almost like home entertainment. If you go back to the 18th century, when children were brought up, to have entertainment skills, they had to learn to play the piano and sing and play instruments, and they staged, and people made their own entertainment. And then we've gotten so used to outsourcing it all.
That's a good point. Yeah.
It really will be interesting to see. We're going to try to cater to all of it. I mean, we're going to stay hybrid, as I mentioned before, but then we were always hybrid. I mean, for 20 years, we had been videoing our live events, and then they were on live stream, and then they were on YouTube and Facebook and whatever. So it's all been kind of the same. But what's going to be interesting is to see how much of the Zoom audience will stick when we have more live events, and how many, if we do Zoom events, whether the audience will be large or whether it will shrink because people now are doing other things. It's impossible.
It's convenient. It's so convenient, to watch things this way.
I know, but you have to be home, and you have to be willing to do that. The reason that we are so totally opposed to ticketing events is that we feel that people should be able to come upon these when it's convenient for them. I had an interesting talk with Ace Atkins about that, Patrick, and he said there's no power on earth that would make him buy a ticket to go, to a book event, because it might not be the right time. He might not be in the right mood, whatever. But as long as he could come to it when it was convenient for him. So that's the way we've operated. And, from a sales standpoint, our sales, I mean, we've never had anything like this year before. Our sales are just amazing. So I am firmly in the camp of providing the platform and letting people find it, and asking them to support books. And interestingly enough, people sometimes just make donations. I mean, we enabled that, and every once in a while, somebody sends us money through PayPal just saying thanks for the videos, or love the podcasts, or good work.
If you enjoy the kind of quality programming that we offer,
right.
Please.
Yeah, but I mean, it really has been interesting, and I'll be fascinated to see how it goes. Listen, we've kept you long enough. I know you've had a very late night, and for you, it's it's really late, and my maple pecan bourbon chicken is calling to me. So there we go.
Congratulations,
thank you, Patrick, and I hope the chicken came out well. Thank you very much.
We'll find out. Suburban Dicks is a really wonderful debut novel. It is our June 1st mystery book of the month. For the people who belong to our book of the month club, lucky you're going to get a copy. And for those who don't, we still have extra copies thanks to Fabian's kindness.
Barbara, can I throw one thing out there that I wasn't going to say, but I think I will? Out of the books I signed for you, there is one book that has an extra secret message in it. And that's all I'll say. That's all I'll say. One book was given an extra secret message.
Wow, it's like a treasure hunt. It's like
when I do that kind of thing, I always hope that it just happens organically, that someone receives it. And I'll do that sometimes in comic book shops. I'll sign one comic on the racks, even though the store doesn't even know who I am when I'm in there walking through the store. So at some point, one customer is just going to flip through a comic book and find the cover signed by me, and then question, what the heck is this? Who did this?
Cool.
But I did add a secret message in one of the copies that I sent you.
So there's a unicorn. There is a
unicorn
there is. Working in one of our copies, and we're not going to open them and direct it. It's going to be completely random. But what a good idea. I love that. That is something that we should think about. In any case, it's been a real joy to meet you, Fabian, and
I appreciate the time. It was a pleasure to meet you both. Thank you.
There'll be a podcast available tomorrow, which I will send you the link, and the video will live forever on our website. So any of you watching it who feel you have friends that have missed this sterling evening, please direct them towards the podcast or the Facebook video page, because they'll have a really good time. So good night, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, Fabian. Thank you, Patrick.
Good night. Thank you, Barbara. Thank you, Patrick. Have a good night, everyone.
Kings River Life magazine now has a mystery podcast called Mystery Rat's Maze. Episodes consist of short stories and first chapters of mystery novels read by local actors. To listen to the episodes and subscribe to the podcast, go to mysteryratsmaze.podbean.com or find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and more.